just catch anybody who's involved in the art scene, since I know you're here and interested in art. I'm Katie Marcuse, and I work at the Burke Museum in Seattle at the University of Washington. And we have a study center called the Bill Holm Center for the Study of Northwest Coast Art. And one of the things that we do is that we have grants for artists who want to come down and look at the collections, look at the old things that might be of interest to you in your artistic journey. We also have grants if you have a particular museum collection that you'd like to go to that's not ours, but is somebody else's. We also have grants that will pay for artists to go to those museum collections. We encourage intergenerational knowledge, so if you're an emerging artist and you want to bring your mentor, or if you're a teaching artist and you want to bring some of your students, we really think that's important and we want to encourage that too. So there are grants for more than just one person if you want to come in a small group, 1 or 2 or 3, maybe 4 at most. And then just recently we started new grants, which are either community art projects, or if you want to hold a workshop in your community, we have grants to help pay for materials, instructors' fees, things like that. So I would encourage many of you to apply. We had wonderful applicants from the last time conference. David Dean Maynor, Tommy Joseph has been over the past few years, the group from Puna that spoke 2 days ago, and other wonderful artists have come and looked through the collection. So there's pamphlets like these out on the tables in the hall, and Ashley and I, this is Ashley McClellan, who also works in the Burke. We have these, so we encourage you, if you know artists who would like to do these, please take some pamphlets for them, or if you work in a carving studio and you want to put these out, we would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Chish. So I'm just getting this set up, this PowerPoint, and we will get started. Okay, let's see, how do we do slideshow? You know how to... Oh, slideshow, there we go.
So good to see everyone. Wonderful. That was an amazing presentation this morning. Like Lee Florendo's, Kate Quaig, her talk on intergenerational trauma and continuing clan history knowledge was just amazing. I wish we had all day for it. But we just heard from our clan leaders in response. I wish we had all day for it. But we're moving forward to be respectful to the people who came a long ways and worked very hard to make their presentations. So I'll just give a start on this, and then we will go to these amazing presentations from our colleagues here. Just wonderful presentations. And this panel will actually extends further and goes into this afternoon with Steve Hendrickson's paper on Rudolph Walton, Akkad scene. But I will start to give sort of hopefully a little bit of a framework to some of the things that we hope to discuss. This panel is on Masters of 20th Century Tlingit Art. And that's an unrecognized, barely researched area. And so we have an incredible opportunity because we have the knowledge in the community. So I'll share this. I thank Paul and Achlit Yanachchin. Thank you for bringing these amazing objects. So we'll have a chance to hear from Paul in response after we do papers with Emily Moore will share her paper on Charles Brown, Zach Jones on Silver Jim Jacobs, and unfortunately Aldona Jonitis couldn't make it. There was a death in the family, the family circumstance. And so we'll have Zach read the paper on Amos Wallace. So just really amazing, amazing artists to explore. So I'll just go into what I'm going to share just to be respectful of time. So Gunos Chish, thank you so much for being here, for being a part of a beautiful conference that honors my father's vision. Places elders, clan leaders, and scholars on an equal level, engaging in real and rich dialogue. I'm very grateful to be colleagues with the conference organizers, including in this room Steve Henriksen, and hopefully I'm not missing anyone. And I greatly appreciate their hard work to put on this conference. And I thank Harold Jacobs, historian Zach Jones, Nora Downhauer, Paul Marks, and the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute for some of the research that I've been doing on Tlingit art. And so I want to thank Bob Sam, and if Bob's here today, he may come in, Shakanasta, for very kindly cleaning the graves of many of the artists that we're going to talk about today, truly honoring the ancestors who made us who we are and set us on a good path in our lives today. And Paul, something I was mentioning earlier, we can have your words as a response to some of the papers and the artists and the topics that we discussed today a little later on. And the thinkers on this panel will tell you a very deep history of cultural continuity in Tlingit art well into the 20th century. A story that breaks down stereotypes and narratives of a romantic storyline, beginning with a classic period, sinking into a quiet period, or some say death or latent period, and resurging into a so-called Renaissance. That's the romantic narrative, the general scholarly narrative that people use in Northwest Coast art. And we'll see where it may apply in some cases, but in a lot of cases it doesn't apply with Tlingit art. We'll see the evidence today. They'll also tell you a story of individual achievement and the cultural world of unrecognized master artists, and their pursuit of scholarship that reaches deeper into the concerns of our native communities and reaches further than much of the new Northwest Coast scholarship, art scholarship. And while this newer material very positively declassifies and deconstructs previous Northwest Coast art scholarship, but unfortunately it still leaves behind, in favor of social theory, the achievements of individual artists outside the previously limited canon. You know, Charles Edenshaw, Albert Edward Edenshaw, Mungo Martin, Bill Reed, you know, this sort of canon that people put in place. Or they're not among the newer generation of artists who have a market infrastructure to work with. And so there's also still great misunderstanding about Tlingit cultural life and art by scholars of Northwest Coast art. The general consensus is that the Tlingit community lost an enormous amount of cultural knowledge, assimilated into white society, and quit their ceremonies until the so-called Renaissance. That's the consensus of the 1970s. Now, I don't wish to underestimate the amount of cultural loss and trauma that our people have faced, and that was some of the topics, very powerful topics from this morning. But I think that the history is much more rich and varied than the presumptions, and that most northern Tlingit communities never ever quit doing their ceremonies. They never quit. They never stopped. Especially the great memorial gathering that we call a Ku'i. So, because of those presumptions, Tlingit art is presumed to have been dominated by the tourist trade. and that the art somehow was diminished until artists and scholars came along in the 1970s. And early and mid-20th century Tlingit artists are then either dismissed or said to at least have done the best they could with what they had. That's what they say. Oh, they did what they could. Well, just recently, a very nice book came out called Carvings in Commerce, edited by Michael D. Hall and Pat Glasscock just last year. And there's a very good interview with master carver Robert Davidson, giving very valuable insights into how he pursues Haida art in today's world. However, you could sense that some of the given presumptions that I've been discussing were at play in the interview. The interviewer showed Davidson a picture of the carver James Rudolph that we see right here, surrounded by his model totem poles. And he asked Robert Davis, he was curious how Davidson would relate to the political and social issues implicit in the image. It was kind of a leading question. Well, what do you think of those political and social issues? Sort of almost talking down, I'd say. Even though it's a really good book. And Robert Davidson is a master, amazing artist. So this is no fault to anyone. It's just working with those given presumptions. But then Davidson was compelled to answer that. He didn't feel embarrassed. He said, I don't feel bad for him. He was making ends meet. That's what he said. Well, Robert Davidson is a brilliant artist, and he was very important to our people. And the book is a very fine one. However, maybe they didn't know who James Rudolph was and what he did. Knowledge still retained in the Tlingit community, thanks to Harold Jacobs and others. James Rudolph's Tlingit name was Cushkit, and he was a master painter and carver of the Tlingit clan here in Akpan. In addition to work for the tourist trade, like these totem poles here, Rudolph carved monumental works for Tlingit clans, including house posts for the Kagwantan and Sitka, one during the so-called last potlatch in 1904, which wasn't, of course, the last potlatch. And here, the Cheit Chain, the Thunderbird screen of the Wushkitam. Now, the Cheit Chain is a map, just as even if, it'd be better if we were actually here in front of it. But you could see a little bit of the evidence. It's a masterwork of play, ingenuity, and deep delight in the ancestral spirit. The screen is bursting with boldness and a joy in being Tlingit and belonging to a clan and a place, in telling and continually living an ancient clan story. Well, like Robert Davidson, I too don't feel embarrassed for James Rudolph. But I have to admit, sometimes I feel embarrassed for myself. And a little sorry for all of us. I'm embarrassed not to know so deeply the world that Cushkit knew. And I'm sorry sometimes that we all don't seem to live in the joy of creation as Cushkit must have. I'm sorry that most of us don't understand his world and his work. That we don't celebrate him and many of his colleagues like we would if we could understand his achievements. So there is sorrow, but there's also hope. Hope that we can try to understand. With gatherings like this, getting together with our elders, learning our language. We can try to ease away from the omnipresent romanticism of our English-speaking world and into what Angayokak Oscar Coegley called the thought world of our ancestors. And here in Tlingit country, what Nora Downhow, Taikne, means by saying that she is Tlingit through and through. We can learn our languages. That will help us to get some understanding. And in fact, an art tradition is very much like a language. And continuing a Tlingit art tradition is very much like learning your ancestral language. At first, you don't understand anything when you're trying to learn it, right? And then there is bewilderment and confusion, right? And then, but maybe you have some awe at the depth of feeling that still can be sensed even at a far distance, and incomprehension. You can sense that depth of feeling, and it can be very moving. And the next thing is you learn by copying the sounds, by chunking bits of language together, and then hoping it makes sense. You know, and that's kind of the stage I'm at right now. Getting some sense of it. But it never really comes alive, though, until you spend time with a fluent speaker and you start to sense it falling into place and resonating with the body in unexpected but intuitively right and healthy ways. That's what it's like to learn an art form. And in Tlingit country, Tlingit art is made out of the same spirit, the same ancestral presence as the Tlingit language. So, Noah Downhauer's father, Willie Marks, Keet Yana was also a great master of 20th century Tlingit art. And he told Noah that it took him 3 years to complete 2 masterworks, still in ceremonial use and in possession by the Dakten Tan of Puna. The Shatupan Keitle Sa and the Satkantu Shau Sa. The mountain tribe dog hat and the Mount Fairweather woman hat. Now, the hat, these masterworks have a great flow, as Paul Marx might say. With a very personal touch of a great stylist, and yet awash in deep culture. Willie Marx, washed in the deep culture Willie Marx was immersed in. And I asked Nora why she thought it would take him 3 years to make this. And then she told me because he listened to his mom, his auntie, his grandmother, tell him the stories, talk to him all the time about what he was making. And she said that the Mount Fairweather hat has the spirit of the woman that comes out from the story. And these stories, she was telling me, these things are really hard to explain. So Willie wasn't spending all that time refining his technique, and as exquisite as his technical skills were, he was tuning himself into the spirit of the story, in the particular Tlingit way that he was taught by his elders. And because of that intensity of focus, because of the care and responsibility he took for the spirits he was representing and the community that he upheld, he was able to create objects, sacred objects, that were of both great cultural importance and aesthetic achievement, aesthetic masterpieces. And last night, Nora, she read from Hatu and Alguyas, edited with her husband Richard. And she read a speech by Jesse Dalton, Nod Claw, of the Dakten Tan clan. A speech that changed her and her husband's lives. They talk about it. As they would dedicate so much of their lives, so much of themselves to the words of the elders, after being exposed to the words of Jessie Dalton and her elder peers. And before reading that speech just last night, Nora said, this is why we do our carving, when she was telling about that oratory. This is why we do our carving, why we do our beadwork. And the speech was for the Kuik in memory of Nora's uncle Jim Marks, Kuhan, of the Chukin AD. One of the sacred objects that Jesse referred to in the speech, it's not pictured here, but the other masterwork, was a Shatuquan Keitle, the mountain tribe dog. Willie Marks, who carved the hat, was also the host, one of the principal mourners of the host clan. And the hat that he carved was being used to console him. The hat that he carved was being used to console him. The elders gave him the tools to live right and well in Tlingit Ani. And he in turn passed those tools on to us if we know how to use them. And so I'll close this talk with the passage about the mountain tribe dog hat. Ya te tuta ana, ya shatu kwan ke kle, ju yawe, ishtanu gukakashaya Yahweh dayu tuhatank, ach ishas, ach kaskohas, ach adhas. Here someone stands wearing one, this mountain tribe dog. It is just as if it's barking for your pain, is how I'm thinking about it. My father's, my brother's children, my brother's sisters. Chish. So Zach's ready, so we'll have Zach just come right up and we'll just keep this moving forward. Chish.
Sounds like the old people.
Mm-hmm.